Welcome back. We just got through all of the Federation networking stuff, right? Real high level stuff. We're just trying to let you know what we can do. Now we're going to do the same for security in Federation. So we're going to talk about why. We're going to talk about how we build things, what we're doing, right? We're going to talk about the different components, all that kind of stuff. So why security? What stretch security stuff do we have? Well, we can stretch a distributed firewall and a gateway firewall and you know, some of the distributed firewall capabilities with app IDs and FQDNs and things like that. Basically, we have a stretched distributed firewall. Now, I mentioned in the last video, I'm going to say it again here, not everything we have is Federation capable today. It's all right. Give it time. It'll all happen eventually, I'm sure. But you know, we have this global firewall now is really what it boils down to, and it's really, really neat. We can use this for any kind of use case where we want to have the same security policy across multiple locations, whether it's a DR thing, whether it's just you know, an acquisition thing, whether it's just I added another location for capacity thing. You know, any kind of use case where I might have multiple locations and I want exactly the same security policies protecting them all, that might be a use case for security in Federation. Now, the workflow is pretty straightforward. The workflow is, we're kind of used to the workflow at this point. We program something through Global Manager. Global Manager is going to program the relevant local managers. The relevant local managers realize everything in the data plane. However, remember, we have control plane stuff that we have to synchronize for this all to work, because that's going to, you know, the control plane synchronization is going to give me the IP addresses for all of the different objects. So we need to synchronize that control plane before the data plane can actually completely be programmed. We do want the distributed firewall to be effective when we're trying to protect access to or from something that's in another location. We need to know about that IP address. Now, in order to help us figure out which local managers are relevant for, say, a given security policy, we have to think about a new object in Global Manager. This is a Global Manager specific object. It's called a region. And what a region is it's an object that defines one or more locations. Right? So it's a group for my locations, basically. And we're going to have some regions by default, right? There's a region called global. The global region automatically includes every location that we have in Global Manager, that we've attached to Global Manager. Everything is in the global region. We also have a region object created for each individual location. Remember, a region is going to contain one or more locations. So we've got some single location regions that are automatically created when you onboard a location. Then you can create additional regions. You can create your own regions, whatever you want. You know, you want an Americas region or an EMEA region or an APJ region, something like that, right? You've got data centers maybe around the world. You can set them up in different regions in a Federation context and kind of work from there, or whatever you might have, right? You know, maybe you're looking at different locations. Maybe you have a new data center or two through an acquisition or a merger that your organization just went through, and they, you know, that new set of data centers maybe has some slightly different security policies. You'd set up different region for that, whatever it might be, right? Regions give me a flexibility to define different levels of personal importance to different locations. We also have in Global Manager groups. These groups work just like we talked about groups, just like we worked with groups in the distributed firewall, except that these groups have a region attribute. So the region attribute in the context of security is how we're going to define the span or the scope of a security construct. In this case, a group is going to have a region attribute. So that's the only place we're going to pull things for our group. So here we see some different examples of span, right, of that region span. When I create my group and I associate a span, I've got a group that spans all three locations, my global region maybe, and another group that spans just two locations, right? So I have a custom created region. And I've got a couple of groups that span only individual locations because, well, I set the individual location as the region object. So, you know, we've got different ways to span our different groups, and you know, we see the table down below that says, oh well, you know, here we have this group and here we don't have the group, and so on and so forth. Again, based on the region value and whether or not a given location is included in that region. So the region is simply helping us identify the span or the scope of the realization of that object in the data plane. Now, we do need to think about the region and where things are. We probably want regions or in our groups, right? Our group mappings, we want our regions to span wherever our workloads might exist. If we look here, I have a group that's associated with a region, and that region includes only locations A and B. And maybe my group inclusion criteria is that the workload is attached to segment S1. Well, segment S1 spans all three locations. So since my membership criteria is that the membership or the workload is attached to segment S1, part of me will look at that and say, well, it stands to reason that if I spin up this workload on location C, and attach it to segment S1, it's going to be included in the group, except that the group doesn't span into group C. Remember, the group isn't realized out in group C or in location C. So the group span and the segment span, right? If the segment is my membership, or if I'm going to have workloads in this location, hypothetically, my group should probably span all of the different locations where my workloads might exist. So this is a case of how not to do it. Because in this diagram, in what we are showing here, this virtual machine in location C doesn't become a member of the group. Because it doesn't become a member of the group, it doesn't have the right security policies applied, or the expected security policies at least. So we want to be careful with that. As I'm building my groups, we've got the same kinds of criteria in Global Manager that we do in Local Manager. I can do dynamic or static groups. The big difference in my federation groups is simply the region construct spanning across multiple locations. We can do tag-based membership, right? Again, though, we want to make sure that the group is going to span the entire set of locations that a workload may exist. So here I want to make sure that my group, my web servers group, spans all three of these locations, because maybe that's where my web servers might show up. Then I've got my tags on my workloads that say, hey, look, this is a web server. Let's include it in the web server group. If I vMotion a workload from location to location, live migration here. If I vMotion a workload from location to location, we will take the tag with it. We will actually be able to move that tag with it. Now, cold migration or something like that, well, we're not going to have the object that we're migrating, right? We're going to have an object in one spot, and we're going to create an object in a new spot, and it'll be different. There's an API-based tag synchronization that we can set up for our security groups if we're going to be doing a lot of cold migrations between locations. With the distributed firewall, once we have our groups set, we can look at, we can go into security, we can look at our distributed firewall, and we've got in our policies an additional capability in the applied to field, right? In our policy, the applied to can still be DFW, it can still be a group, but in applied to, we also have the ability to apply a policy to a region, again, containing the scope of where those rules are going to be realized. So we want to use that capability because maybe not all of my policies and the rules therein, maybe all of those are not going to be relevant in all of my different locations. I'm going to use this as one more way to maintain and contain the scope of where my rules are realized. Now, my rules are always going to be, my global rules are always going to be processed first. They're always going to be put at the top of my firewall list. I can see that in my local manager, and they're always going to be the first rules that we work with, right? I'm still going to use good firewall practices. I'm going to set applied to on my policy to define the region. I'm going to set applied to on the rules themselves to include just the groups more than likely. And everything's going to be happy. I'm going to manage this like it's my distributed firewall. I just have to think about that at a little bit of a larger scope at this point, now that I've got multiple locations involved. Now, in my distributed firewall, in NSX 401, in my global distributed firewall, I can now actually set up, or not set up, but enable or disable the global firewall in individual locations. So my rules don't have to be global, right? All of my locations don't have to have my global firewall, right? I can enable global firewalling on some locations and not on other locations, and so on, as is necessary in my environment. So this is an interesting feature. You may have a use case for this. You may not. It's okay. We can also now have a global exclusion list where we're simply not going to implement the distributed firewall through Global Manager, right? So we can exclude individual workloads or groups of workloads or things like that from the distributed firewall. So we can do that globally now as well. We can also define in NSX 401 time-based global distributed firewall policies, which gives me that much more flexibility in enabling and disabling firewall policy based on a schedule. So we can do a lot with security in Federation, but it's not exactly different from what we're doing locally, right? The big thing is the region definition that we have to think about in a federated infrastructure. Right? So Federation security is really, really good stuff. Now, this wraps up this whole section of videos. This also wraps up this larger install, configure, manage course. We talked about Federation here. We've talked about, Federation onboarding and installation and networking, all these cool things. Over the course of the week, we've gone from having nothing to building out NSX Manager clusters to building out logical switches and logical routers and setting firewall policy and playing with advanced threat prevention and finally getting into Federation. We've covered a whole lot of ground. I hope that you have enjoyed what we've gone through, that you've had a good time with this. I try to make it as fun as I can. There's only so much I can do from this side of a camera, but I'm giving it an effort. But it's really awesome stuff. I hope you had a great time. I hope you've learned a lot. And well, let's face it, I hope to see you in another class. I've pitched at least one of them throughout this week. So come back, see us for more cool stuff.